What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by Koren, comic creator. You've had a lot of books out. Most recently, now you have a book coming out called All Tomorrow's Parties, the Velvet Underground story. And I can't wait to talk to you about this. But welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we hop into your books and everything, how did you get into comics? Have you always had a love for it, or is this kind of something that you kind of just found as a creative outlet?
Well, I grew up in Israel, and believe it or not, comics were not a big thing there at all. Like the only comics that people knew about were from Bazooka Joe, because people had somehow the Bazooka Joe gum there. So
Yeah.
whenever you say comics, it's like, oh, Bazooka Joe, which is kind of back then it was like a sad state of affairs. But I went to an after school class of comics, and it was taught by one of the only people who were actually like a working living cartoonist in Israel. And I became his assistant, during my teenage years. And he just taught me a lot. And he had a huge comics collection. And I would just borrow things from him. And that's how I learned. That's how I got into comics. And he was more into mainstream comics, so that's how I got started.
Okay.
Remember for my birthday, got me like The Dark Knight Returns and some of the pillars of Watchmen, and so he was giving me that kind of education. And then later on, I had a friend who had like his own underground zine or a magazine in Israel, and he started showing me the more alternative people like Robert Crumb and Chester Brown and people like that. So I had like a really good exposure to that in my teen years in a place that really didn't have very many comics at all.
Yeah. Well, it was so fascinating. Like I said, I got to preview All Tomorrow's Parties, and it was my first exposure to your work. And what I love is when I see a creator who writes and draws a book, because I feel like you have so much ownership in your project that you're working on, and you have such a unique, I think, cartoon ability that it sounds like you picked up from your instructor in, Israel. And so where was this process for you then in your journey where you're like, I want to start to tell stories and create comics?
Well, I mean, ever since I was a teenager, I was making comics and I was always really ambitious. Like I
Okay.
would start these like epic books that I would never finish. And then in my 20s, I went to the US to study at the School of Visual Arts. And I was studying illustration, actually, even though they have a very good cartooning department. And while I was taking classes there, I was making these short stories. And, as I graduated, I was able to have that book of short stories published. And so that was my first experience in having my work out there. And it was really exciting. It was really thrilling. I wish I could still feel like that excited when a new book comes out. But I remember like, I think my first book came out in France actually. And it came out and it was just so thrilling. And
Yeah.
now another book comes out and I'm like, all right, it's just so you take it for granted. It's still exciting when it comes
Yeah.
in the mail, but it's just it's there's nothing like the first time you get
Right.
your book that you worked on in your hands.
Yeah. So this book that's coming out it's through Humanoid. Talk to me a little bit about this project. All Tomorrow's Parties. It's subtitled the Velvet Underground story. If someone hasn't got a chance to probably check this out yet, what's your kind of elevator pitch for this?
Well, the Velvet Underground were an avant-garde rock band in the 60s that worked in collaboration with Andy Warhol. So that's kind of in a nutshell, who they were. And they're just a very unique band. And they were very, very ahead of the curve, very ahead of their time. They are considered the godfathers of punk because a lot of their music and their attitude and the way they dress, things like that. They were like precursors to punk music, and that was, thinking this is 1965, so this is 12 years before punk officially,
Okay.
was there. So really early on, and they had Lou Reed as their lead singer, so also someone who is just super important in the history of rock and roll. Um, so I just think their story is really fascinating. Either if you don't know much about the band, or if you like them and you want to learn more,
Yeah.
or even if you're interested in the art world of New York in the 60s and learning about Andy Warhol and the factory. All of those things are in there.
Yeah. Well, this was kind of my first exposure with, I'd heard of the band Velvet Underground, but I wasn't very familiar with them, and the music and how they were so connected with Andy Warhol. Like when you decided you wanted to tackle this project, was this something that you've always been a fan of, or you kind of like stumbled on to, their story and you're like, this would be a fun story to tell?
I've liked them since, I think my late teens. I found out about them.
Okay.
And then I've always really liked the band. They were in the top 10, my top 10 bands. And I always liked Lou Reed. And I'm not like a fanatic fan, so I don't have, you asked me like, do you have all their albums? Like I don't collect records, and I don't have like very much ephemera or anything like that. Um, but I was mostly looking, when I was deciding what to do as my next book, looking for a band that had a good, or any good story. And
Yeah.
when I started reading about them, I realized that there's like a really good story here, the story of their origin, and the connection to the art, to this avant-garde art world of New York in the 60s. There's just a lot to tell.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is it. I'm gonna do a book about these guys because they have an interesting story.
Yeah, and it really is. And I think you hit the head on the nail on the head when you were talking about if you're interested in even music or biography kind of aspects of their stories. It's such a unique story, and to see the dynamic and all of that. Um, and I read the preview and I loved it, and I something about the way your writing meshes with your art is it just tells a beautiful story, and I just fell in love with you as a creator, and I was like, I wanted to look through more of your stuff. And then I saw like you were Eisner nominated for you did a a couple years ago about the Hollywood Dracula story. And before that you
Mhm.
did the Rod Sterling, like the Twilight Zone. And I instantly read through them all. I'm like, I want more of these stories. So
Right.
you know, being an Eisner nominated, how was that for you? Like, that's such a cool moment, I bet, as a creator to be recognized. I feel like just even nominated.
Yeah, it was really great because it's great to feel like people read your work and
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. And it's just a validation of your hard work, and so it's really great. And just being nominated is already very big honor.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I didn't go that year to Comic-Con, but I've been in the past, and I see the scope of how many comics there are out there, and to know that like you're one of them, that out of all those thousands is really a great feeling.
Yeah. It's got to be a cool thing. And so, we mentioned earlier in the show that you're connected. This is being published through Humanoid. How did you get connected with that publisher?
Humanoids
Humanoids. Did I,
with an
okay.
S, yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Um,
Ah.
no worries, no worries. Humanoids, they're like a publisher with a really interesting history. They're started in Europe by Jean Giraud, who's Mobius, and I forget the other author, but basically they were this, you know, publishing house that was started by artists, by some of the greatest science fiction
Yeah.
artists ever, cartoonists ever. And they moved to the US at some point. They like expanded to the US. And Uh, I think I was pitching around the Rod Serling book, and basically everybody said no. And then humanoids were like, "This is great. This is a great idea. Let's do this." So they were the ones that saw the potential and saw that this has like real chance of being a good book because it was just a pitch.
Yeah.
And it did really well. And then they basically since then they're like, just let us know what do you want to do. Just send us ideas and but they're pretty much giving me free reign. They trust me to pick
Yeah.
something. I try to pick things that are not too obscure, but also are not too mainstream. I did a book about the Velvet Underground, not about U2, or like, there's something that's a little more in the fringes.
Right.
And again, like Lugosi, um, he's kind of he's a legend, but at this point, a little bit slightly like may have been forgotten by some people.
Right.
So I'd like to bring those stories out, and so people can enjoy learning about these people.
Yeah. So expanding on that a little bit, then, so you know your process for finding like a story that you want to tell, is this something that like you know you kind of have like you hear about Dracula, Lugosi, and or Twilight Zone, and you're like, that could be a good story, or you go back into like, oh, I remembered experiencing this as a child. Like, how do you kind of determine what stories you want to tell?
After a book is done, then I have to kind of get into that zone of
Okay.
looking for my next book. So it's just like these days of just looking through, you know, lists and like Wikipedia articles and like, yeah, digging through. And a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, I heard of this. I mean, I again, like growing up in Israel, I was exposed to a lot of the things that like Americans were exposed, but
Yeah.
some of them didn't make it. So, for instance, with Lugosi, we never had the Universal monster movies being rerun on TV. We never saw like, I mean, I'm sure there were maybe you could get it if you really looked for it, but it wasn't part of culture. I learned about it through, I think the first time I heard about like the Frankenstein movie was through the Muppet Babies because I was 10 or 11 and I watched the Muppet Babies and there was an episode where they recreated the Frankenstein movie and I was like, "Oh, what is this thing?" Because I wasn't part of the culture.
Yeah.
Um but I get into that zone and then like I start looking for ideas and whatever is a good story, but also something that I enjoy and love, or can get to love and know, is a good subject matter.
Yeah. So, I know you've done some original IP and stuff. But when you dabble so much in telling, biographies, stories of, true stories that have happened, how do you go about like doing your research, and how do you tackle that project compared to something that's more of like, say, original idea?
You have to try and read as much as you can get your hands on. And then after you feel like you read enough biographies and enough articles and watched enough documentaries, then I start to write, the outline. And then with comics, most of what it is just editing things down. Because if you
Yeah.
look at the Velvet Underground story, there's like hundreds of things that I didn't put in the book because it's a comic. So there's script that if I wrote a script that's like 200 pages, it would be a 400-page graphic novel.
Yeah.
And I don't think I can't do that, it'd kill me. So I have to narrow it down. So it's basically like picking and choosing
Yeah.
and then crafting the right story from what is out there.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like most of your books, they seem to be about the same length, and as well, what's a process like for you when you have an idea and you say you want to start to create? Is it you write out the script and then do you kind of piece it together as you go along with your art, or how do you put the book together?
I mean, I think it's pretty standard
Okay.
cartoonist, you know, process that I do, which is I write the script. I know some people break it down per frame. I write it more as almost like a screenplay, and then once the script I feel like it's in a good place, I do thumbnails with a really small that only I can probably understand them, and then I do pencils, tighter pencils, inks, colors, and then the only thing really that I don't do with humanoids is the lettering. So they send it out to a letterer, which is great because I think lettering is not my strong suit. It's great to have like someone who's professional and like can do really nice stuff with it. Where I kind of see lettering as like a pain in the butt, so it's better to have someone else do it.
Yeah. Well, again, like I think I always gravitate towards a story that is, has some truth to it and is something that's original. When you is this something like, because like I said, the last couple I've read from you have been, biography based graphic novels. Is this something like, is that your wheelhouse that you prefer to explore stories and say, how can I then retell these stories?
Not necessarily. I
Okay.
mean, I've done before these books. I did do several stories that were fiction or science fiction, that kind of stuff. And um, I just, there's challenges to both sides,
Yeah.
but in terms of what's easier to kind of maybe hits a wider audience right now is the biographies, but I'm developing other stories that are fiction alongside with these nonfiction stories. So no, I'm not planning to just
Yeah.
stick to that world, but it has turned out to be the writing part has become easier than it turns out now that I'm doing trying to do a fiction uh script again. I'm like, wow, this is hard because I have to make everything up. And with these nonfiction, it's all real. It's all like there's so much to pick from. And then when you make a story up, you have to make it feel authentic, and it's really difficult, like to make something out of nothing.
Yeah. So, but you seem to you gravitate towards both. So it sounds like, and you enjoy both worlds and dealing with
Yeah.
that dichotomy. So if it's something where you're dealing with an original story for you, what's more of that process for you? Do you have like just kind of this a folder of ideas that you're like, this could be a cool story, or what's your writing process when it comes to something original?
It's like I have an idea. It's either I sit down and I try and think of ideas, or I
Okay.
have an idea, and then usually I let it kind of sit in my mind to test if it's good enough to kind of the germ is good enough. And I think sometimes if you let it sit long enough, it actually gets better. So I had this idea recently, like maybe a year ago, and I kind of sat on it. And then as I was kept thinking about it, it kind of changed and got better. And I was like, this is it. Now it's ready. That first idea wasn't ready. Now there's a twist to it. It's better. So it's different for different people, but yeah, you got to have your drawer full of like ideas and notes. And for me, a lot of it is I just keep it in my head, which maybe is a mistake because I must have forgotten some. But there's definitely like there's definitely two or three that are just like loaded up there and like ready to go that I know I really want to do, but I just haven't had the time to.
Yeah. As a creator, is do you find it easier for you to illustrate a book that you're writing, or and that, because it seems like the last couple you've done both the writing and the illustration, or are you almost as a creator sometimes harder on yourself and make yourself, you're like, oh, I would never have another artist have to draw this, but like you're like, I'll do it, so I'm gonna draw this. Like, how are you when it comes to that process with drawing?
I think I definitely do enjoy it better when I wrote it. But it's also like so much work that a lot of times I'm like, why am I doing this? Like And I am trying now to see if I can have some books that I just write and someone
Yeah.
else draws, because the drawing is really rigorous and it's definitely harder than the writing. And and I think that like artists should be getting paid more than the writers, but it because it is harder work. So yeah, I'm definitely open to that. But yeah, I it's super hard. And I think the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, it would be nice to be just a writer at some point, and maybe do less drawing. Still do drawing, but maybe like less, not as
Yeah.
often.
So, I mentioned the three of the books that I read, The Velvet Underground, and Twilight Zone and Dracula Story. As you're doing your research, you said you'd always find these kind of on the fringe stories that you wanted to tell, and then you start to go and dig into the history a little bit, doing research and things. Was there anything in any of those stories where you're like doing research and you go, oh my goodness, I didn't even know that, and that makes it such a better story, or something, an interesting fact that you didn't realize creating.
Oh yeah, all the time. It's every story, every subject you would pick. I mean that I've picked has been like that, where even like shorter stuff, like I had a comic in the New York Times on Sunday that was about William Steig, who's a very famous children's book author. And I didn't do as deep of a dive because it was just, it's like one page.
Yeah.
But even just researching about him, I found out like really crazy stuff. Like he had something called an Oregon box, I think it's called, or Oregon
Hmm.
box, which is a box that like collects the sexual energies of the universe, and like would sit in it to like be able to focus. Something really strange, like you find out really, really
Yeah.
weird stuff when you do the research and you dig in. So no, every project there's that you find out really great things, and it gets better the deeper you go in.
Yeah. Was there anything, talking about the Velvet Underground, where, as you started to explore their story more, where you're like that you gravitated towards it originally because, like you said, they were the, kind of founders of, punk, and you didn't want to do something like U2, you want to be a little more fringe, but then as you started to dig into it, that you're like, wow, this is really fascinating, and I'm really cool that I'm getting to tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I found out a lot of things, and the things that I thought were most interesting are in the book.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, there's always there's always stuff, and there's the moments that I thought were most striking or most telling about the people in the book. I made sure to include them so you have a better picture of the characters.
Yeah. Is it, when you're creating, is it hard for you to, to edit? Like you said, you had to get it down from like a 400-page book to, almost half that. How is it for you, like the process of editing what you're working on? Is it an easy process? You're like, oh, this is, or is it tougher to really find out what's the meat that should be, of the story that should be being told?
It's fairly easy for me.
Okay.
I like when I do the script, I already have kind of narrowed down I think what I want to say, and I'm very good at like holding back myself from like making the story go too out of hand, because I keep in the back of my mind I am the one going to draw this.
Yeah.
I don't want to be drawing. I don't want to spend 7 years. Like there's this other book about, this is actually a pretty good book about Warhol by this European cartoonist named Typex. And the book is like 500 or 600 pages. And he must have spent like at least 5 or 6 years working on it. And that's great, but I can't do that. So I just hold myself back.
How, I mean, you mentioned, a book like that probably took a while. How long does the process usually from creating a book take for you? I know that's a loaded
It,
question.
No, this one wasn't, this one took longer because it was full color. So it definitely took longer, but I think it beginning to end was maybe 18 or 20 months. So about
Okay.
that much. Yeah.
Okay. So you invest a lot of your life into these stories for
Oh
quite a
yeah,
while
yeah, yeah.
compared to probably if you were writing, you know, a monthly issue of a comic book or something like that. So um I know you kind of said you don't get as excited maybe as you used to when a book comes out, but when it's well received, that's got to feel good because you put so much time and energy into that project, I'd assume.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that it's very important when it comes out in the world to hear that good feedback, and I make sure that I put in the effort so that I can be proud of it
Mm-hmm.
and not something that I just slap together.
Right.
So that's why, it takes time and yeah, that's graphic novels is a different game than the monthlies where they like,
Right.
they have to get them out real quick.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, Grant. I'm grateful for you taking some time. I gotta ask though, because like I said, I went back and I read the Dracula and I read the Twilight Zone, and I loved them both. Um, do you have a favorite Twilight Zone episode that you grab like I just
Yeah,
want to know.
definitely. Yeah, Eye of the Beholder is my favorite. And we even had an evening where we screened some episodes at the school where I teach in New York.
Okay.
And I picked that episode because it's just one of my favorites. And so if you ever, if you haven't seen The Twilight Zone, that's the one to watch. But there's just so many. There's a lot of great ones. But if I love Eye of the Beholder.
Yeah, I that's one that it's on my list to rewatch because I had one of those like VHS tapes when I was a kid that had like a compilation of like 4 or 5 episodes, and I remember that one, and I remember To Serve Mankind episode and things like that, and so they're just such unique stories, and I like, and so again, I love that you're finding these kind of fringe stories to tell that are bringing hopefully bringing people exposing people to maybe elements of culture that they haven't gotten to check out before because of maybe not exploring the Velvet Underground or the Universal Monsters or Twilight Zone. So I just think it's a really cool thing.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
So well, again, when where how can people find this book, All Tomorrow's Parties, the Velvet Underground story?
Yeah, it's out August 22nd, which is next week, should be hitting your comic book store and available in the various online sellers. And yeah, you can should be able to find it.
Nice. And I you seem like you are staying busy, always creating, always writing and drawing. Where can people follow along with you to see what you're working on and what you're doing?
My name, Koren Shadmi, you just can just find it on Instagram should be the first thing, or I think that's probably the most active, but you
Okay.
should be also able to find me on Twitter or X as it's called now. And yeah, that's about it.
So, well, Corinne, thank you so much just for taking some time to talk about all your work in the industry. I hope people check out All Tomorrow's Parties, the Velvet Underground story, and I'm again, I this was a great read, and I highly recommend people to check it out.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. So, gang, with that being said, all the links that we talked about in this video of how to follow Corinne, check out the book are going to be listed in the description of this video, or if you're listening on podcast, you can find it in that description. But with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.